But I remember asking John, I'm like, what's the point of being a good caster, right? Why are we spending so much time on this? And one thing he said is, the better caster you are, the more places you are going to go able to go fish. If you came to me and you're a really good caster, I'm going to send you to some really great rivers. And you're gonna enjoy and get so much more out of the sport.
It is you. Oh, yeah.
Hi, everyone. Tim Schultz here. Hey, I hope you're doing well, and I want to thank you for listening to the Reading the Water podcast. As always, I appreciate you being here. Hey, I have something special for you in this episode. Back in October, I went to fly fishing school at Todd Tanner's School of Trout. They offer classes on essential and foundational skills, basic trout, dry fly, and spring creek fishing. And for all of the classes, the group of instructors is absolutely unlike anything you can find anywhere else. I wanted to tell you about it, but rather than listen to me talk about it, I thought the best way would be for us to have some people from the school on the show. So in this episode, we're lucky to have the school's founder, Todd Tanner, two of the instructors, Pat McCabe and Brant Oswald, and one of its alumni, Chris Elbow, join me to talk about the school, the instructors, the curricula, the experience for the students, and in general, what it means to become a better angler. And by way of introductions, Todd Tanner is an outdoor writer, former fly fishing guide, expert angler, and the founder and head of the School of Trout and the founder and president of Conservation Hawks. Todd's written for Fly Fisherman, American Angler, Fly Rod and Reel, Sporting Classics, the New York Times, and a host of other publications on topics ranging from basic fly fishing skills to what we need to do to preserve the resources we love so much. Brant Oswald is a lifelong fly angler, guide, and instructor who's directed the Orvis Fishing School in San Francisco and co-directed Mel Krieger's fishing school and is currently an instructor for the School of Trout. For nearly the past 40 years, he's been a guide, instructor, and outfitter on Montana's Paradise Valley Spring Creeks, and he even has a film credit in A River Runs Through It. Pat McCabe, another instructor for the School of Trout, learned the craft at Andy Puyan's fly shop in California. Pat was an instructor at Andy's fly fishing school and spent years as a guide on Henry's Fork. He's a superb fly tyer and caster, a source of nearly infinite knowledge about fly fishing, and will soon be opening a fly shop in Lafayette, California called Crosswater Creek Outfitters. Chris Elbow is the Christopher Elbow of Christopher Elbow Chocolates. And if you haven't had them, you should pause this podcast right now, go online, and make an order. They are really that good. Up to about 4 years ago, Chris was intrigued by fly fishing, but he didn't know where to start. So he took classes from the School of Trout, and now he is all in. Now, to counter these experts, Chris and I are here to give you the learner's perspective on what it takes to be a better angler. Well, enough with the introduction. So let's talk with these guys about improving our fly fishing skills in general and Todd's School of Trout in particular.
It is you. Oh, yeah.
Well, hey, Todd, so great to see you again. Wonderful to have you on this show. I know being the headmaster for a trout school, along with all the other things you do, keeps you very busy. So thanks so much for being here.
You're very, very welcome, Tim. Good to see you.
Yeah, well, Pat, you were my chauffeur for much of the School of Trout that I attended. And it's not the same as driving to a river together, but I'm looking forward to chatting with you again here today. Thank you again for taking the time to be here.
Thank you, Tim. I'm happy to be here and happy to have been invited.
And Brant, you and Pat probably spent most time of any of the instructors helping me erase old casting form and build up new one. And I promise you, I'm pivoting at the shoulder, raising and lowering the elbow right now. So it's so great to see you again. I'm so happy you're here. Sure appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And Chris, we have not met on a river yet, but I've seen your name on boxes of the best chocolates I've ever had in my life. I am looking so forward to hearing about your journey to becoming a better fly angler, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share those with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. This will be fun.
All right. Well, hey guys, I want to set this up with something my friend Jerry Dennis once wrote about fly fishing, and I think it's very relevant to this topic. Here's what he wrote. He said, fly fishing is complex. It requires giving our full attention to the fish, water, weather, insects, our flies and how they're tied, our rods and how we cast them, the weight of the line, the diameter of the tippet, the state of the world, the social and genetic history of humanity since the Pleistocene. So, Todd, you founded the School of Trout to help people navigate those complexities and become better anglers. Actually, according to your website, your focus is on helping them become excellent anglers. So, can you tell us about the school, its instructors, its students, its curriculum?
Yeah, that's a big one, Tim. I would say that our primary focus is helping people create a really strong foundation for their angling, so that no matter what situation they find themselves in on a trout stream or a river, on a lake even, they have a really good opportunity to go out and enjoy success. And I think we talk a little bit about what success looks like. And that's going to be a different thing for different people, right? Not everybody views success the same way. For some people, it's catching big fish. For other folks, it's lots of fish. For an awful lot of us, it's just going out and having the best possible time on the water and heading home feeling like, man, I really enjoyed that. And I'm leaving with a big smile on my face. And I'm really glad I had this opportunity to be out on the water. So it's one of those things where we work hard to bring the very best instructors I can find, the very best people I know of, from all over America, and we bring them into one place, and we do a couple classes a year. So this isn't a ongoing thing in terms of, it's not like we're doing a class 1 week and then 2 weeks later we're running another one. We do typically 2 classes a year. Some years it's only one. Other years we might do 3, but on average it's 2. And so we are very, very fortunate to have some truly exceptional instructors. And the other thing is we do everything we can to bring in students who are thoughtful and inquisitive, and they may or may not be passionate about their angling, but they feel passion for the outdoors. And maybe if they're just beginning, they want to figure out, is this something that I'm really going to enjoy? It's going to be a huge part of my life going forward. So, passion is sort of a big thing for us. I mean, Pat, you've been with me right since the beginning. What am I missing?
Well, Todd, I don't know that you're missing anything. I think certainly you have done an excellent job of bringing in the best instructors possible, and from so many varied aspects of trout fishing, especially. I mean, we've got instructors from with very different backgrounds, but every one of them has tremendous amount of experience, and then the students have always been fantastic. I mean, we've never had a student at the School of Trout that wasn't eager to learn, wasn't attentive, and everybody just seemed to always be raring to go, and for very long days that we have at the School of Trout.
Hey, Chris, you're a student, a return student, alumni, I suppose. What brought you there? What?
I kind of, I found an ad for the School of Trout, and I had probably fly fished 4 or 5 times prior to that, and knew it was something that I wanted to be more involved in and be more of a hobby and part of my life. But I really, that first class I went to, and I guess it was 2021, I knew within 30 minutes that this was the place for me. I was partly looking for kind of a sped up, learning curve. Like we talked about, all the casting, the tying knots, what leader, what tippet, how do you approach fish, all these things that I kind of struggled with the few times that I went fly fishing. All of a sudden, I knew I was going to learn more than I bargained for when I went to the class, and I can't imagine not have gone, not have been involved in these classes and the interaction with the instructors, where it's taken me on my fly fishing journey in a short period of time has been really kind of life changing for me. This is something I'll do the rest of my life, and the foundational skills that I learned there, as well as the relationships that we've built with instructors and fellow students, has just been awesome. And it's something that it's the highlight of my year when I can attend a school of trout class or one of the trips.
Brant, how you've been pretty much instructing. Your whole life's been fly fishing, hasn't it? Your
Pretty much.
career, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
At
so
one
you've
point, I
been.
thought I was headed for an academic career, but took over the Orvis schools back in the early '80s, and worked on a couple different fishing school programs there. And actually, I was a little bit of a latecomer. Todd invited me to join the instructor crew with the School of Trout, I think a year or two after the program started. But yeah, and as a guide, I enjoy the instructional part of guiding. Is the whole reason I love to guide is to teach. So this has been a perfect fit for me, and a chance to work with, as we've already said, some of the very best instructors in the whole game. So it's been instructive for me, as well as a chance to be able to teach.
Hey, I want to ask you about that. I saw an interview with you online, and they ask you to tell two truths and one lie. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And your
Yeah.
two truths, if I get them right, one is that you love to fish spring creeks in Montana, something along that line.
Right.
Your lie was that you don't like to have a gin and tonic after a long day of fishing. And
That's
your
right.
other truth was you have a master's degree. What's the
Correct.
field?
Linguistics.
Linguistics. Yeah.
Yep.
And that
I
was
still think
the
I'd love
career
to
you were.
stick an electrode. Yeah. A fish brain needs to have an electrode stuck into it so I can talk to him a little more directly, but we haven't figured out the technology yet.
So, Chris, let me ask you a question again. Where were you when you first went to school? Would you consider yourself a beginner?
Very much so. Like I said, I think I only fly fished 4 or 5 times. And the first time I did was in 2020 with a buddy who just kind of flippantly asked me to go fly fishing, and it was so frustrating of a day, but I kind of could tell, like, hey, there's something here. There's a lot of things happening here, and I couldn't quite unpack what they were and what I had to do to catch a fish. Obviously, I didn't catch any fish that day. I'm sure they were very safe within a couple feet of me from being caught that day. But I didn't even understand that there were different types of casts when I went to the class. And that was like, the very first thing we did was casting instruction with John Jurasek. And 30 minutes into the class, I was kind of one of those things where you realize how much you don't know. And, I knew I was in for an intense week, and but the passion that all the instructors had, not just for fly fishing, but for the students to learn and excel and succeed, was really a big reason why I think the School of Trout was so perfect for me. And I have this kind of attitude of, when I try something or I get into a new hobby, I'm all in 100%. Sometimes they stick, or sometimes I'll learn it and then I'll be done. I could tell this was something that I'll learn the rest of my life on this, and the School of Trout has given me that foundational skill set to, be on a river somewhere now by myself and analyze, situations, and what am I doing wrong? Why didn't I catch that fish? What was wrong with my cast? So now I feel comfortable. You could drop me on any piece of water, and maybe I'm not successful in regards of catching fish or a lot of fish, but I feel 100% comfortable being out on my own, tying knots, selecting flies, analyzing the water, all the aspects of fly fishing that might have taken me years and years to learn are now just almost second nature.
Where did you learn things when before you went to the school? Were you reading magazine articles,
I
reading
was
books?
watching YouTube videos, reading articles. YouTube was probably the biggest source of education at that point. But I wasn't living anywhere near where I could go fly fish, so it was going to be very sporadic.
Uh-huh.
Whether I could get out and but now that I know how to go practice casting and it just and having the resources still not just in the class, but I can text any of the instructors, if I'm having an issue, or if I'm having a great day and it's something I think I would want to share with them. That's really a tremendous resource that
Yeah.
continues well beyond after the classes are over.
Yeah. Todd, what so people that come to the school, your schools, they can have a variety of experiences coming in. You could have someone who knows nothing about fly fishing, perhaps, to someone who considers himself a pretty good fly angler. They catch a lot of fish, but they want to be better. That seems like a challenge. How do you put together an experience that can adapt to all levels of all backgrounds coming in?
Well, I think, Tim, the big thing is you need really good instructors who are facile and able to sort of shift things depending upon, what's right in front of them at the moment. Uh, we do get beginners. We get folks who come in and we've had people who have literally never cast a fly rod before. And I think I can speak for Pat and for Brant in that sometimes that's the best because they don't have bad habits to break, right? We're not dealing with old muscle memory or, I've been doing this way for 30 years and now they're asking me to change it. Sometimes the beginners have it a little bit easier because, it's like, okay, they're just listening. If they're good listeners and they're interested in learning, they're getting the best possible information and they don't have to go back and relearn things or redo stuff. With, more experienced anglers, the big thing in that situation is attitude. And I think you probably experienced this when you came to the Dow Trout class back in October. If people come in with the idea that I know it all already and there's, and you can't really teach me anything and I'm here to just sort of, hang out with the instructors and show them how cool I am, we're not the right school for that. We're not the right place to do that. We want people who are inquisitive and thoughtful and really interested in improving. I mean, you can ask Pat or Brant, but my guess would be that one of the highlights from our classes is seeing every single student improve. And not everybody improves at the same rate and not everybody improves in the same way, but they all get better. They all, they walk out knowing things and able to do things that they couldn't do when they came in. And like Chris is a perfect example of that. I mean, Brant and Pat and I have watched him evolve over the last few years from somebody who, was pretty much a neophyte to someone who I would say cast better than the vast, vast majority of fly fishing guides out there, and who has the ability to literally go to a stream and see what's going on and then make really thoughtful choices and then have fun with it. So, I mean, to me, that's sort of where we are with this stuff. Pat, what do you think? Am I right about that? Or do you think that all the students are improving, or do you think that we occasionally have folks who don't get better, regardless of whether they come in as a beginner or as a more advanced angler?
Todd, I don't think that I can ever recall a student that didn't get better. We've certainly have some students that that have struggled, especially with casting. Or sometimes we'll see a student that gets really, gets better and then reverts, and then we've got to coach them back. But I think by the end of a week, um, everybody is better, and everybody has the ability to diagnose stuff within their own casting and their own fishing. I mean, that's one of the biggest keys. Um, I can't tell you how many students that I have seen, struggling. I'm watching them struggle to form a loop or to, make a really good cast, and then they'll maybe set the rod or put the rod in their offhand, and I'll watch them pantomime a proper casting stroke, and then put the rod back in their casting hand, and make a good cast, But what that tells me is that they have been listening, and that we're able to give them that ability to maybe self-diagnose something and make some corrections on the fly. And hopefully they take that with them when they're fishing. And from, having talked to students and having been able to fish with some students on some of our hosted trips, I see that. I see students, that make corrections on the fly, and that's the payoff right there, because I think the ability for us as instructors to help each student where they are, whether they are that beginner or whether they're a more advanced angler, um, that's the key for me. I mean, I think it's really cool. I know last year we did a hosted trip on the Spring Creeks, and one of our former students who had just done the basic school, I was downstream, and I was fishing, and it was a hosted trip. So we were fishing, and I looked upstream, and I watched him hook 3 trout, one after the other by himself, on Armstrong Spring Creek. And I just thought, wow, that's so cool. Anyhow, yeah, no, I think it's a lot of fun. Brant?
One before Brant jumps in, one thing that we should do is give kudos to John Jursek, who isn't on with us today, but John heads our casting program, and obviously Pat and Brant are two key cogs in that. And anybody who comes and hangs out with us gets to spend a bunch of time with Brant and a bunch of time with Pat. But I do think we want to really give John his due, because he is an exceptional, in addition to being an exceptional caster, as good as I've ever seen. He is a wonderful, wonderful instructor and teacher. And I think, John, when Pat was talking about the ability to self-diagnose flaws and say, this is what I'm doing and this is how I sort of need to shift things based on what I'm seeing or what I'm feeling. I mean, that comes from John. He's sort of the guru on that, in giving people the skills to say, okay, what am I experiencing, and how am I going to shift this to get something closer to ideal? Brad, am I wrong about that, do you think, or
No,
would you agree with me?
That was exactly what was running through my head, that, again, that we need to talk about John, not just as a caster and instructor, but I think the other thing that really shines, and I think, Tim, you've made mention of this, that John's not only a great instructor, but the whole package that he's put together for the School of Trout, it's sort of a cohesive unit, that they build on skills as we go through the week of the school. And I think you're absolutely correct that one of the things that's absolutely key that makes students find success in their casting skills is the fact that he does build in that self-diagnosis. Oops, I got a tailing loop, and coaches the students repeatedly so that my loop just opened up. What do I need to change? I just got a tailing loop. What do I need to change? And as Pat said, you can often see the students, you can see the wheels turning as they stop and consider what's going wrong, and then you see them correct that fault. That's a real key to becoming better. And I would say, too, the other thing I'd say, Todd, is, the fact that most of our students have improved. I think the fact that we usually put together a group of really motivated students is really helpful in doing that as well. That, they come in with the right attitude, so that, when they encounter John's casting instruction and the rest of the instruction we see, they're ready to accept that instruction. So it works really well.
Mm-hmm. Hey, we're talking about people coming to you to get better, or maybe even to learn. the basics. Where did you all learn? Brant, where did you learn to cast? And how was
I
that
think I'm actually
process? Did you
kind of
learn
an
it the
odd.
wrong way first?
Oh, absolutely. I was totally self-taught. Had an older brother that got into fly fishing, which was sort of the reason I wanted to do it. But we were far enough apart in years that there was no mentoring there. My parents were from the Midwest. My early fishing was fishing for catfish on the Snake in southern Idaho. So when I picked up a fly rod, it was, I hate to think what it looked like when I first got started. So, casting was totally self-taught. Fly tying even was totally self-taught for years and years. So, I'm probably lucky that I stuck with it through some of that kid frustration of, not really knowing what the heck I was doing.
Uh-huh. How about you, Pat?
I was very fortunate. I mean, from a really early age, I was absolutely taken with just fishing, any kind of fishing, spin fishing, bait fishing, and I have an older brother, and he and I used to fish together, and we saw somebody fly fishing once, and both of us just kind of said to each other, that looks like the most fun we could possibly have. And we were very fortunate that close to our home there was a fly shop, a guy by the name of Andre Pouillons, who was a kind of a big deal in the fly fishing industry for a long time, was the owner of that shop, and so we just started hanging out there, and both of us learned a lot from Andy, and we had the good fortune of um, his instruction, and a local fly fishing club that was around had a youth group and a youth so there was a youth group, and some of Andy's teenage employees would work with us in the youth group, and then Andy himself would teach us. And by the time I think I started going there when I was about 10 or 11, and by the time I was 13, Andy decided that if I was going to hang out at the shop that often, I may as well be working there. So I started working at the fly shop when I was about 13. Um, and same thing. He said at that time if I was going to work on the fly shop, then I needed to learn to tie flies, and so he put me in his fly tying classes, and you know, so I was very fortunate to have great instructors, and at the time I was able to also meet Mel Krieger, and Mel Krieger. I got to work with him a little bit in fly casting, and so just and the people around Andy. There were a lot of great anglers that I was able to hang out with when I was really young, and so the names running through my head are vast as far as people who helped me learn to cast and learn to fish, and you know, and then Andy introduced me to the Henry's Fork area, and that's my brother and I used to take trips up to Idaho and Montana and fish every summer, for quite a few summers, and both of us ended up guiding up there, and that's where I met Todd, actually guiding on the Henry's Fork, and he and I became great friends, and have been fishing together now for 30, I don't know, 38 years, somewhere in there, long time.
Mm-hmm.
You're making us sound really, really old, Pat.
Sorry, we kind of are.
How did you learn to cast, Todd?
How did I learn to cast? I had an unusual beginning, Tim. When I started fly fishing, I was already an adult. I was a really serious angler from the time I was a kid. But, I started out fishing worms in the creek that ran by my house, my folks' house, and moved into bass fishing, and then moved into some pretty serious Lake Ontario stuff with trolling with downriggers and outriggers and things like that. And a buddy of mine, Jay Reynolds, and we used to occasionally take trips west. And one year we fished the Snake outside of Jackson. And I don't know, I must have been 26 or 27 at that point. And we did great. We had an outstanding day. It was the first time we'd ever hired a guide, and but we were spin fishing. We were watching everybody else fly fish, and we were like, First off, this spin fishing stuff is getting too easy. We're catching too many fish. It's just not as exciting as it used to be. And then this fly fishing looks beautiful. It's graceful. It's elegant. It's intriguing. There's obviously, it's really, really different than what we're doing. And so I came home and I took a class with some TU folks. We'd get together for an hour once a week, and they'd give us a little bit on insects or a little bit on rods or reels or whatever. And I think they probably touched on fly casting. But I must have been a crappy student because my casting was terrible. And so for the first couple years I fished, I made a point of never fishing where anybody else might see me, because I was convinced that if somebody knew what they were doing and they watched me cast, it would ruin their day. Mm-hmm. So I would hike in 2-3 miles away off the beaten path to just get away from folks. And I think I probably eventually learned from some of the same folks that Pat and Brant have worked with, but I did it via video. So I'd buy like a VHS tape of Mel Krieger or one of the Gary Borger or one of the other folks who were doing a lot of videos back in the 80s, and try and teach myself. And it wasn't until really I started working with John and Pat and Brant at the School of Trout that I started being more thoughtful about my casting. I mean, that's one thing that really separates our school, I think, from anything anybody else is doing, is that we have such a strong emphasis on casting. And, it's like I mentioned before with Chris, it's wonderful to see his advancement. Most fly fishers today seem to try and not focus on casting, which to me is like counterintuitive, right? It's like, that's the thing. Fly casting is the thing that separates us from every other type of fishing. So why wouldn't you want to get good at it? Why wouldn't you want to delve into it and get as good as you can? So, I've put a lot of time into my casting over the years. For the amount of time I put in, I'm probably not nearly as good a caster as I should be. I need to watch Brant and Pat and spend more time listening to John than I do. But it's one of those things where, that is really the essence of the sport. And being able to, walk out on a river and make an accurate 30 or 40 or 50 foot cast, put the fly where you want, is sort of the predicate for everything else that follows. It's, if you can do that and you have some basic idea of the other stuff, you're going to catch some fish. I mean, I don't know, Chris, you have gone from being a neophyte caster to an excellent caster in a relatively short period of time. Does it feel that way to you? Do you feel like you're a good caster now, or do you still have sort of doubts about that?
I do feel like I know I've made progress. I feel like I'm a good caster. There's times when I'm out on rivers and creeks and I see other people fishing, and I just stop and watch their casts. And sometimes I'm just like, oh boy, I feel sorry for this guy, because it's so ingrained in my mind now. And I remember asking John at the very first class, and I would say casting is the most intense part of the class. It's the most daunting. But I remember asking John, I'm like, what's the point of being a good caster, right? Why are we spending so much time on this? And one thing he said is, the better caster you are, the more places you are going to go, able to go fish. If you came to me and you're a really good caster, I'm going to send you to some really great rivers. And you're going to enjoy and get so much more out of the sport, and I know there's a lot of ways to measure success in this sport, and one of the grateful things is that having those basic skills takes some of the frustration of the sport away that might dampen somebody's time on the water. And I hear John every day when I'm out fishing. I know the second I make a bad cast, I've got his little voice in my ear of, Chris, was your elbow going up and down? So he's constantly with me on the water. So,
Hey, Chris, I know the first time you went to School of Trout, you said you'd just gotten started in fly fishing, didn't know much. Had you cast enough that you had to relearn your cast, or were you basically starting from
I
scratch?
Yeah, I felt like I was kind of starting from scratch. I don't think I had, you know, I mean, my fundamentals on my cast were non-existent essentially at that point. So I think I was very lucky to be able to find this pretty early on in my fly fishing um, adventure that I
Mhm.
didn't have to really relearn a bunch of new things and get rid of some bad habits. So
Mhm. Mhm. So
Hey,
I,
Tim, a question for you.
yeah.
So you came as a very experienced caster,
Mhm.
and I did something horrible to you in that I said rather than just sit off to the side and take notes and hang out and watch us from afar, participate in everything. So, what was your experience as an advanced caster coming to the School of Trout and walking into a situation that you probably didn't really weren't prepared for or hadn't thought about much?
Yeah, it was, I don't want to over dramatize it. It was mind blowing in a sense. So, my evolution, I try to think, how long have I been fly fishing? It's, 30 years, over 30 years. And when I started, I'm totally self taught. I got a Cortland outfit. I learned how to get the fly on the water, and I could catch fish. Uh, I felt like I was fly fishing, but I realized at some point this wasn't the way you fly cast. So I went through another self teaching phase, got books, and started. And my focus was everything I read, and maybe it's the engineer in me, went to the rod. I like, okay, this is what the rod needs to do to form a loop. And I worked really hard on that. And I started to be able to form loops and started to feel I could get longer casts. I could get accurate casts. Wind knots were a thing of the past. I couldn't remember the last time I ever had one. And I felt like, okay, I'm not the best caster in the world. I know how to cast. And then I came to School of Trout, and John started describing this crazy thing where you make a bend in your elbow, swing at your shoulder, and go up and down. And I'm like, well, when is he going to teach me how to fly cast? Because that's not how you fly cast. So it was a completely different mechanics of the body. Now, from everything I know about physics, the rod still has to do the same thing. It has to load, unload, follow, stay in a plane, follow a good path, get out of its way of the line, all of those things. But there's a lot of different ways to try to do that with your body. And what blew my mind, the mind blowing part, was this way of doing it that Don taught. And for me, my commitment, and you all, Chris wasn't there, but Grant, Matt, and Todd all saw it. I did. I made a commitment to myself. I'm not going to use my old cast. I'm going to do this thing that's very different from the way I cast. And in a nutshell, it was my cast was pivoting at the elbow. My arm would come out from my body, and all of the action would be an elbow pivot. And if you go to YouTube, and maybe Chris, you did when you were learning, and just go find someone teaching you how to fly cast, they're going to be casting some version of that. I have found it hard to find many videos that aren't put out by one of you guys or John or some competition anglers, casters, where I'll notice they're casting the way that John and you all taught. So it's a long way of saying it was eye-opening, mind-blowing thing, and I brought it back with me. I've been practicing in my lawn. I think my cast is changed now, which is not an easy thing to do. When you've got 20 years of casting, thinking you know how to cast, and then changing the whole mechanics of your arm. But I'm a believer for sure. And let me turn the question back. I don't know if this is. I don't want to get too controversial, but I don't mind a little controversy. Uh, why? I mean, Todd, you made a comment earlier that saying that Chris now might cast better than a high percentage of guides out there. Why are there so many people that don't cast in what you've taught me to be a more fundamentally sound way?
I think that there's a really simple explanation for that, Tim. And I've written about this in the past. For folks who don't know, I've been writing about fly fishing for 30 plus years at this point. And it's fly fishing is a little different than other sports. Like if you get into golf or you get into tennis or skiing, for example, uh, basketball, baseball, we know what solid fundamentals look like in all those sports. Okay. I can watch somebody ski, regardless of how good I am as a skier. I can watch somebody else ski and say, yeah, that person is fundamentally sound as a skier, or they're not. They're struggling. They're not able to do parallel turns or whatever it might be. They can't ski the moguls, whatever it could be. Uh, and that's the same thing with golf. That person's got a sound golf swing, or no, they don't. But with fly fishing, and Brant and Pat, I'd be interested to hear if you guys agree with me on this. With fly fishing, there is no consensus on what good fundamentals look like. So outside of a few places, sort of the competitive casting folks and so on, you'll find a wide range of styles. So John will argue that most of those aren't styles; they're just bad form. Uh, and I look at it like I probably was of that view 10 or 15 years ago, that it wasn't, there were just a bunch of different things and people should figure out what works best for them. And I no longer believe that. I believe that there is, there's obviously a huge amount of variation in the human body. And, I'm built differently than other people and I'm going to cast differently than other people. But within that sort of overall paradigm, there's the idea that I do know what a fundamentally sound casting stroke looks like. I can make that cast. I can cast in a lot of different ways, but that's the easiest way to cast for me. It's the most efficient way. It's the least tiring. It's the way that never makes my shoulder or my elbow hurt. And it allows me to be as successful as I choose to be on the water. So, I look at it like most people, including some really good anglers, don't have any idea what a fundamentally sound stroke looks like. They know what the rod's supposed to do, like you were talking about before. They know that the rod has to accelerate and then unbend and then stop, but there's no consensus on what the body should be doing to get that to happen. And I think the thing that we have, and this is true whether it's Brant who's talking in front of the students, or Pat, or John, or any one of our other instructors, whether it's Hillary or Tim Romano or Bob White or whoever it is, they're going to adhere to sort of the guiding principles that John lays out and do that in sort of their own way, but give people that real understanding of what a fundamentally good cast looks like. And so to get back to your original question, if you don't know what a good cast looks like, how are you going to make one? Maybe you can do it. Maybe you get lucky. Maybe you got very fortunate to find the right person to teach you on YouTube, or your buddy is a really great caster and that individual is able to express things in a way that you understand and, can pick up and replicate. But for most people, that's not the way it works. And so, I've spent a fair amount of time doing fly fishing videos and short films over the years. And one of the things that's really hard with that is I watch other films and other videos, and I watch the way supposedly good anglers are casting, and it makes me cringe. It's like, oh my God, this is preserved for time forever. And it's really bad casting. I hope people are not watching that thinking that this is what they should be doing. So, people will disagree with me on that, and they'll say that, there are lots of different ways to cast, and it's all about what's being most effective. I just look at it like, I want my body to last. I don't want my elbow or my shoulder to wear out. I want to have fun out there. I want my cast to be enjoyable. Casting alone can put a smile on my face. And if I watch Brant cast or Pat cast and even Chris cast, I'm like, man, that's just fun to watch those guys. They're having a really good time with that. So it's like, it's a pretty damn cool thing. And I would love to see casting be more central in fly fishing going forward rather than less and less, which has been my experience.
One of the things that I've noticed. So, and I have, I was going to say I have more fly rods than I should have, but there's no such thing. I have a lot of fly rods, and I have different fly rods, different actions, different weights, of course, like many people do. And what I found is the way I had taught myself to cast, I could cast all of those rods, but if I went from one rod to another, it might take me a little bit to make sure, okay, here's how I move my arm now to make this rod cast better. What I found casting with the way I was taught at your school when I've come home, it's not a different stroke anymore. I might slow it down, I might speed it up, whatever, but I'm not struggling to remember, oh, how do I cast this rod versus how do I cast that rod? And Brant, a question for you. You guide a lot of anglers. And how common is it that you would see someone, if you just judge their cast by the stroke, by the loop, perhaps, look like a good cast, but when you examine their mechanics of their body, you see problems?
Oh, it's extremely common. I mean, the number of, I think we've kind of pointed ourselves toward that. It's a shame because I see so many intermediates that get to a certain point. I think probably, your self-description that you manage to get the fly in front of fish and you manage to catch some fish. I don't know. I've always thought about it over the years that it seems like there's some sort of a weird ego block that happens once someone gets to that intermediate stage and they do manage to catch a few fish. The idea of going back and looking at fundamentals is really difficult for them to do. But you're absolutely correct that, you see, I guess what I'd consider good pragmatic casters that can, get the fly in front of the fish. But then in a lot of cases, if they have, those are the anglers that sometimes then if they try to get longer distance, they struggle. The wind comes up, they have difficulty, forming good loops to be able to fight the wind. So it's sad that we don't have better, just what Todd just pointed toward. It'd be nice if, good casting skills were appreciated more than, how big the fish is in a photograph. It's, I think a much better judge of angling skill. I do think one of the things that I guess we sort of led into it, I think, Mel Krieger was my mentor and as a caster and casting instructor, I've worked with Bruce Richards and some of the other guys that developed a lot of the FFI curriculum. And I think we've really come to it. The biggest difference between John's approach is you do end up having to deal with both the physical parts of, your body parts moving the rod to create a loop. And you also have the physics that you mentioned that, out of the rod and line work together to create that loop. The thing that John has really done is really emphasized, the physical part of it. And I think in the long run, I think intermediate and advanced casters do benefit by understanding some of the physics that are involved. But I think most of the time with an absolute beginner, trying to groove the basic stroke is one of the things that will be, a great foundation for them to always come back to. So, both of those elements eventually are part of your progress in becoming a good caster. But, starting with fundamentals, again, you don't learn to play golf without trying to figure out how to swing the club. And I guess if there's another pet peeve that we can throw in at this point, I think part of the reason why casting has become a less integral part of the sport these days is because we're designing rods that are so damn stiff that they don't bend very nicely and they're not really all that pleasant to cast. And I think it's sort of pushed people into, whatever I have to do with this stiff thing to get the fly out in front of the fish is what I'm going to do. And it doesn't necessarily lend itself to, to good casting mechanics.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'll jump off that.
Pat, I have, Pat, I have a two-part question. One is the method that John and the rest of the school of Trout teach. Is it fair to call this the competition style casting? Is that how the competitive casters, is that the predominant way that a competitive caster casts?
Yeah, I'm predominantly yes. I mean, the fundamentals of the stroke that John teaches is very much the stroke that almost all competitive casters that I watch cast. There's some minor variations, but with certain casters, like Todd mentioned, body type. I mean, if you watch Steve Rajeff cast, he has a little bit different casting stroke than some of the other casters, and I think partly that's because he's so strong, and he obviously understands the mechanics of how to bend the rod and make it do the things you want it to do, but very much like a golf swing that where you watch great golfers and they might have a slightly different looking swing, but at impact they all are in roughly the same position. I think that is the one of the keys to fly casting is making the cast at the stop at the back of the arc or the top of the arc and the forward stop. I would say 98, 99% of great casters that I watch are all in very similar positions at those points. And they might have a slightly different way of getting there. But I would say with competitive casting, it is almost always based in a very similar style than to what John teaches. I think Brant made a great point in that what John has done is he has developed a very basic, very easy to understand mechanics of a fly cast, and then everybody learning from that can modify it slightly to their body shape and body style and strength, and it'll be refined. And no two casters are going to look exactly the same, but if they're pivoting at the shoulder and making their elbow go up and down, they will be ahead of the game in so many ways, as far as versatility and being able to cast in any situation. Well, like you said, with any rod. I mean, the same casting strokes works with the stiffest fly rod that's available today, coming out on the market today, and it works with a 1970 fiberglass Fenwick. The same stroke works. You might speed up or slow down the stroke, or you might lengthen or shorten the stroke, but the actual stroke doesn't change very much at all, if at all.
Yeah, the thing I noticed was that I struggled a lot with mentally was I associated forming the loop as a very distinct action in my cast. And when I would cast the way John and you all taught, well, I don't know where that's happening now. But then I would even fight all my instincts, do things exactly as John would tell me to do. Maybe one of you were standing at my side, and then I would hear John say, "That's it. That's the loop." And I don't know what happened. But the point is, it's not work. If you do it right, it naturally formed. And I didn't have to consciously think this is the time where I form the loop as much. And it was a interesting thing for me. The one of the reasons I asked about the competition style, I saw someone, I'm not going to say who it was, very, very famous fly caster. And the opening of their YouTube video, someone was videotaping them working with a group. They said, you don't want to cast like those competition casters. And they seem to disparage competition style casting. And I suspect that's a whole nother podcast to talk about but I found it a very effective way to cast. It's Chris, when you're out and you see other casters, how often do you see, because you're probably looking for it, do you see someone that, and kind of as I asked Brant, sometimes you'll see someone, good loop, good cast, but you watch their method and you realize, oh, they've just kind of invented their own way of doing it. Do you notice that when you watch people cast?
Very much. And actually, I can't recall, and since this is also new to me and I don't have a ton of history in this, I can't recall being out on the water and seeing somebody's elbow go up and down. Like you said, they might be forming, a decent loop. They're obviously catching fish. They're getting the fly where it needs to go. But that basic fundamental of raising and lowering your elbow, I don't think I've ever seen, outside of, anybody that's gone to the school of trout.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. I've watched a few videos of Maxine McCormick. Yeah, there's an elbow going up and down there. That's uh, Pat. You, if I remember right, you do some competitive casting. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do a little bit of competitive casting, not on any grand scale. I live in California in the Bay Area, and so I'm fortunate to have the Oakland Casting Club and the Golden Gate Casting and Angling Club nearby my home. Um, so I go to the clubs and cast. We have some very um, low key competitions every couple of weeks. So I hang out and cast with those guys. But it's fun because I am casting against the same folks that are going and casting in the World Championships, and and casting with Chris Korich, and um, you know, just last weekend I was casting, saw Whitney Gould at the Oakland Club and was casting with her, and um, you know Glenn Ozawa. There's some great casters there, and a whole lot of the folks there that are not well known or famous names or aren't going to the World Championships. There's some fantastic casters there. You mentioned that this person you saw in the YouTube video said that competition casting was not what you wanted to do for fishing. Um, I think that's somewhat of a misnomer. I think that where it is different is maybe in presenting the fly.
Mm-hmm.
So presenting in a competition is somewhat different than presenting in a fishing situation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Often, unless you're fishing a wet fly or fishing a streamer where you're in saltwater. Actually, I think it's actually pretty consistent. I would say it's about exactly the same. You do want to present the fly with a straight line, or fishing a wet fly or fishing a streamer. You're typically fishing a straight line, right? You're not creating slack or trying to get a drift. So that is the one difference in competitive casting. You're casting at a target, or you're casting just purely for distance. But the casting stroke doesn't change. Your presentation change. Like John talks about, you move your arc forward or backward. If you're making a false cast, you move your arc backward, and you're casting above the water. Well, presenting a fly, if you want slack, all you need to do is leave it there, and you're gonna create a puddle cast, or and create slack. So that's where the School of Trout comes in and refines some of those casting techniques and some of those presentation techniques. That's the only difference with competitive casting, I would say, is that presentation of the fly with a competitive cast is usually you're not worried about slack or worried about not spooking a fish. You're trying to hit a target relatively hard usually.
Yeah. The school definitely addressed that issue. Hey, I was going to ask here. I'm going to ask Chris. Here's my question: if somebody's out there, you got a fly rod, or maybe they've had a fly rod, don't know where to go. They're intimidated. Read some articles, watched videos. You got to learn about meters, dry flies, nymphs, wets, streamer. You know what it's like. Short of going to a school, where would you tell them to get started? Maybe you've done that. Maybe you've had a friend that you've helped get started now. Where should they get started, and what should they be looking for? What are the big hurdles that we could help them get over quick?
It's interesting. I've gone out with a lot of people that consider themselves, relatively accomplished fly anglers now. And I think it depends on what they want out of the sport. I would say School of Trout's not for everyone. There's people that I've fished with that I know they wouldn't want to put the time or the investment in. to learn these things. They just kind of weekend warrior type, um, you know, fly anglers, which is great. And you know, I, again, I think this goes back to how Todd curates the students and the class. The people that come to these, they all have I think a bigger interest in the sport than just, hey, I want to go out fishing on the weekends or a couple times a year. I looked at this as an investment in my future, because this is a hobby I'll take to my grave, and do the rest of my life. And I think one of the things I see the people I go out and fish with now that haven't been introduced to this style of casting or this type of fishing is that why are we fishing? And I've walked away from the school of trout very grateful that I've learned the why am I doing this. It's not so much to catch fish. I can't remember who. There was a quote that was really telling to me. You guys will probably heard it, but the progression of a fly angler, it's like, I want to catch a fish, and then I want to catch a lot of fish, and then I want to catch a big fish. Now I just want to go fishing. I think the enjoyment of nature, being out there, I'm grateful that I found that really early on in this sport, because I think that's going to carry me a long way. And I just don't see a ton of that. I know there's people I fish with, and they just like getting out on the water. It's not so serious to them, and that's great. Everybody's got their own reasons for doing things, but you know, it's not about catching fish anymore for me. I obviously that's the bonus, and I enjoy it, but I just love standing out and slowing down my hectic life. And as I think, as Todd has said, this is a great, more how much more of an intimate way you can connect with nature than by doing the sport. So it's not, we can talk about all the casting, the fundamentals, the flies, but there's that something about standing in a river in the mountains that is bigger than all of that combined to me.
Mm-hmm. Todd, Brant, Pat, if you, based on your experience, what is I don't know if there's a biggest, but I'll pose the question that way. What's the biggest reason someone who wants to take up fly fishing quits? What do they run into? Is it the wrong expectations? Is it that they should have put a couple $100 into a fly casting lessons? What barrier do people run into, and how could we maybe help them not do that?
Ooh, that's a good question, Tim, and not one I have been thinking about. I would say this is going to be sort of a counterintuitive answer for a lot of people. I would say that the biggest issue for folks who quit the sport or really, really strongly back away from it would be they let other people set their expectations and determine whether they're successful or not, or whether they're having fun or not. I think it's really important, and I talk about this a fair amount at the school, for folks to be intentional, to say, this is what I want out of this experience. And if the person to my left or the person to my right is out here for a different reason, that's cool. There's no problem with that. But I'm here because I want to be here. And I think when people allow other folks to set their expectations and to determine their level of success, there's an inherent risk of it just not being as exciting or interesting or engaging as it could be otherwise. So I don't know, Brant, what do you think? Is there anything?
Well, I'd maybe just pile on a little bit to that. I guess one of the things I do try to do in the School of Trout is, I think maybe our friend Hillary Hutchison is the only other full-time working guide among the instructor crew. So I do get a little different perspective in working with guide clients all the time. And I think you're exactly right, Todd. I think one of the things that does happen And unfortunately, all too frequently, which I've heard you mention before, is that a lot of times the guide, in a guided situation, the guide is the one setting the expectations for the client. And that's not the way it should work, that, the client should be getting the experience. So I think a good guide hopefully is sensitive to that and recognize that, again, their friends told them the only way to catch a fish is with a dry fly. So they think that, with beginner skills, they're going to go out and, whale on the fish with their limited skills, and they find it frustrating. And again, that's a case where somebody else, or maybe the guide, has told them that's what they're supposed to be doing. I think one other thing, I guess, that popped into my head, Tim, when you're asking the question is what keeps people from pursuing it long term, or what gets frustrating. I used to teach a one-day kind of crash course for a local fly shop in Montana. And the first thing I tell the students is, in a one-day crash course, you're not going to learn to fly fish today. I'm going to try to give you enough practice in casting that you can structure your own casting practice. But the second thing I think that ends up happening is, maybe with my academic training coming back in, there's so much jargon in this sport that I think one of the things a lot of people find daunting is, without much experience, walking into a fly shop and trying to get advice or talking to somebody else on the stream. I think sometimes one of the things that can be really helpful, again, is even if they get some sort of, evening community college class or something where they can learn a little bit of the jargon so that they can at least just feel comfortable walking, into a fishing situation and asking a question and not feeling like they're going to be put down. And I think we could say that, there's certainly been points in fly fishing's history, which I hope is changing, but, for a beginner to walk into a fly shop with, the group that's hanging out there, that's not always a really welcoming crowd. So I think, we're making progress in that. But again, I think we need to be a little more inclusive and make sure that we're welcoming to people that are just trying to learn and not be putting them down.
Mm-hmm. Pat, what's your experience been?
I think both what Todd and Brant said make perfect sense to me. And, Chris at the very beginning said he thought that possibly he would have given up just with the intimidation of all the jargon, of all the different things, the flies, leaders, knots, casting. You read about fly fishing or you watch a video, and there's a lot going on there. And I think that can be intimidating for some folks. Setting expectations, I suppose, is the biggest thing. Going out with the expectation of having fun and learning is a great expectation. Going out with the expectation that you're going to be successful right away maybe is not the best expectation. I think that's where hiring a guide comes into play, and people enjoy that. And I think the guide, gives them that expertise to be able to catch fish, maybe with limited skills, and that's great. And I hope that people take advantage of that. What I hope for people is that they then take whatever they learned from a guide or from a school, or whether it's a one-day school or a school of trout, is take what you can from that experience and then go out and hone it and practice it, but with expectations that you're only going to have success by practice and experience and time on the water. And a school of trout is an opportunity to maybe cut that time down, or any a guide trip or a class, any kind of an instructional situation can cut that learning curve down. But I think expectations are the biggest thing. And then, like Brant said, being intimidated by the jargon or by the, kind of the, hey bro, fly fishing, sometimes the, machismo, there's some of that in the sport as well that, I wish would go away. I suppose there's also, at least historically, a little bit of an elitist sense to fly fishing, and people are intimidated by that. There's a cost factor that can intimidate people, and hopefully fly shops can be good at helping people at every level and every income level find a way into the sport, because it doesn't necessarily have to be all of that. There is some cost involved, and there's no getting around that. To some extent, there's a lot of gear involved if you're going to get into it seriously, but you don't always have to necessarily have the creme de la creme of fly fishing gear to go out and have a good time.
Right, right. Well, guys, one comment I wanted to make about the school, something for me. So when I went in, I was prepared. I'd done enough research to know that this casting method wasn't the way I cast, and I was either going to commit to it or I wasn't. But I came in. I fly fish all the time. I tie flies and blah blah blah. Make my own leaders but every class I learned something. Every topic I learned something, and I think that's one thing that can happen to fly anglers sometimes, and is they think, I got it now, and they don't realize there's all kinds of little things, little tricks that people do. The way they tie a knot might speed up your knots or make them stronger, whatever it might be. And I was talking with Todd about this in a similar context, but I went 40 years of my life, over 40 years, tying my shoes wrong. And I watched a YouTube video, and the guy started by saying, I'm going to show you how to tie your shoes right. And I almost turned it off. And then I realized at the end, oh my gosh. And so I look at it that way, as if I can go that long in my life tying my shoes wrong, and I would wager that some of you might be doing the same thing if you haven't ever seen this video. Think of all the other things that you might not be doing right, but they work, right? They work. Hey, I want to thank you guys. I've kept you here over an hour now. What a wonderful time to talk to you. I would like to ask you all one question, kind of a fun question, but I think it'll be instructive to listeners. I'm going to start with you, Todd. Waders. Do you wear waders with a big zipper or not?
I would not buy waders without a zipper, Tim. And for someone of my age, I would strongly recommend that they move from, if they're not already using zippered waders, that they move to them at the earliest opportunity. Now, there's a ton of different brands out there. There are some really seriously expensive ones. There are some much more modest ones. I don't know that, I don't want to tell somebody what waders to buy. Every manufacturer's waders fit a little different. Orvis is going to fit a little different than Patagonia. It's going to fit a little different than Sim's, going to fit a little different than Squala or whoever. But just between, either zippers or no zippers, I'm like totally team zipper.
Team zipper. Brant, how do you get your gear out on the river? Vest, sling pack, waist pack, backpack? What do you use?
I'm an old guy. Actually, I've done some field testing for one of the manufacturers, and actually vests. I think I've been told to field test vests because I am an old guy, and I learned to fish out of a vest. I've field tested dozens of sling packs and everything else, but a lot of, I guess again, I'd have to say I'm still a working guide, and I specialize in spring creek fishing, so I tend to carry. It's pretty fly intensive and kind of tippet and gear intensive stuff. So I still find a vest is the easiest way to keep myself organized.
All right. Pat, do you reel with your casting hand, or do you reel the correct way with the offhand?
Wow, that's pretty rough. Interesting way to pose the question. I reel the proper way with my casting hand. I reel with my smart hand. So my dumb hand can hold onto the rod to play a fish. My smart hand should be on the reel. I don't think it matters, Tim, which hand. If you're comfortable reeling with whichever hand you've got, that's fine. I tried to switch once because it made some sense to me to reel. I cast right-handed typically, and it made sense in theory to reel left-handed, and I tried to do it, and for whatever reason, my left hand is exceptionally good at line handling, but terrible at reeling. Conversely, I can cast relatively well left-handed, and my right hand is not very good at handling line. So if I fish left-handed, I make the cast and I hand the rod to my right hand to fish. So there you go. I reel right-handed.
Yeah. Well, I remember you loaned me a rod, and that's why I loaded that question. But it's interesting that how uh, evangelical people can be about this issue. I mean, there is a right way and a wrong way to do it, and so I won't be quite as controversial for you, Chris. Yeah. What is the easiest and most difficult knot for you to tie?
Oh, the easiest is probably. It's funny because I have this battle with myself out on the river. The difference between a triple surgeon's knot and the blood knot. I'm perfectly capable of tying a blood knot while I'm sitting on the couch, but I think I'm so much faster at the surgeon's knot. When I'm out on the river, and I kind of get in a hurry, especially if there's rising fish in front of you. Um, so I would say the blood knot's probably the most challenging and to do out in the field for me.
Uh-huh.
Surgeon's knot is typically the way I go. So.
Okay. Yep. Well, anybody have a closing comment? Anything we didn't cover that someone wants to address?
I have one more thing to say. We kind of hit on this a little bit, as far as curating the students. But one thing that I'm super grateful for that the School of Trout has given me is this community and group of friends. I consider that some of the students really great friends now. We go out and fish on our own and, text and talk, constantly. So it's given me this really great social group of like-minded people that I just are an absolute joy to be around. That to me is worth the price of admission. And that goes with the instructors as well. We consider I consider a lot of them great friends, and um, I wouldn't have found that otherwise. So, and that's made this sport so much more enjoyable for me.
Yeah, there are a variety of ways for people to learn. Books, videos. Of course, you want to be careful. If you get stuff on YouTube, anyone can post something on YouTube. Friends and instructors and full immersive courses. And there may be others, but I can't imagine there's a course that has a stronger group of instructors than Todd's put together. It's incredible. It's an all-star cast, and they're all as accomplished as they are, as anglers, as knowledgeable as they are. Wonderful people. You can't, and you know that, Chris. You can't spend a better time with a group than that. It's incredible. So, guys, I thank you so much for taking the time talk with us. Been fascinating for me. I hope that the next time we all get together, we're on a river and not looking at each other on these screens. How would that be?
Excellent. Thank you, Tim.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Tim.